Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here. I do feel a little odd being the warm-up act for being in property and infrastructure for a panel called Show Me the Money, which is next. But that said, I just want to quickly acknowledge a couple of people, Duncan Gay and Anthony Albanese, who as ministers really drove a lot of the infrastructure investment in Western Sydney. Duncan got the 80-20 split in favour of New South Wales on the roads to the airport, which was quite the achievement for New South Wales, less so for the Commonwealth. And obviously Chris Brown, who has done a wonderful job yet again putting this together. I think he's setting himself up to be sort of a benevolent dictator in Western Sydney. And the only advice I'd give, Chris, and I'm sure you have plenty giving it to you, is that Robert Mugabe is not the model that you want to follow going forward. So I believe there's a clicker somewhere, is that right? So while we're waiting, so I've been asked to talk as the warm-up act about what we need to do to get the boom happening. What do we need to do to keep it going? So we've started really well. There has been record levels of public sector investment in Western Sydney. There has been the bones of the new city put out, and we've had the Greater Sydney Commission's vision. The next phase really is about business coming to the party, essentially. So how do we do that? So I want to take you through five things, I guess, that I think from our perspective we've been thinking about a lot. And the first one, unsurprisingly, is think big with structure. We have had a lot of national conversation around what Western Sydney is. I noticed Theo from Deloitte has put out a lot of excellent reporting about what Western Sydney is now, what it could be. But in the, following on from the vision of people like John Bradfield, it needs to be set with structure. And the Greater Sydney Commission has done a lot of that work already with its 3 cities and its plan for Western Sydney. And in the private sector, we have to help with that next. And that means that we need to come to the party following on from the Future Transport Plan and the Greater Sydney Commission work and other things to say from a private sector perspective, how do we actually get there? And that means we need to think big, and that's beyond more than just the next infrastructure deal or the next property deal. So what does that really mean? It means something like this. So, we've had decades of waiting for an airport decision. We've got one. So now that we've got an airport, what goes around it? And over here you can see Orchard Hills, which is a beautiful defence site that they currently have. Bringelly, Greendale, Luddenham, Kemps Creek. The way we should be thinking about these things as a private sector is how do we maximise the public sector investment, the public capital that has gone into the decision to build an airport, the future decision around a rail line, the future decision on Western Metro, that sort of things. And at Lendlease, that's certainly the way I think about it in terms of our integrated approach to things. But beyond that, not just the transport infrastructure, but the social infrastructure, the schools, the hospitals, the other type of soft infrastructure that goes in, the arts. How does the private sector become part of that conversation? And I know Richard Alcock, at Western Sydney Health District is thinking about this at Westmead because he told me so earlier. And I think that's a really good thing. As a private sector, we need to focus more on that. So the second thing then is, sorry, I'm ahead of my slides, incentives drive behaviour. It's the only thing after 6 years of studying economics that I actually remember. Incentives drive behaviour. And in most cases, in our market, we incentivize via regulation, we incentivize via legislation, and we incentivize via subsidy. But to get Western Sydney to be the type of economy that we want it to be, we need to incentivize business in a way that gets it to cluster around the infrastructure assets that our public policymakers have gifted us in a way to Western Sydney, around its airport, around its rail links. And one of the ideas we've been playing with is a special economic zone concept. Which immediately people go, well, we don't do that in Australia. That's true, we don't. But the question is why? And here is a very busy slide that says that other countries do this effectively and other countries like us do it. So in the US alone, there are some 250 different economic zones that have been set up by different state, local, and federal entities that are really driving industry clustering in their in-state jurisdictions. In Western Sydney, we have a situation where we're going to have records amount of infrastructure, a brand new airport, rail connectivity, and people moving increasingly to this area so that 2050, around then, 2 out of 3 new Sydney-siders will be living in Western Sydney and will be choosing that as his home. And that's why at Lendlease we are focusing our attention on building the accommodation, the housing that needs to go into it. In fact, somewhere, I think one of my colleagues was telling me we're somewhere around the 15 to 20% mark of housing starts in Western Sydney, which is great. And we want more, we're hungry for it. But we're not just hungry for the housing starts, we're hungry for the infrastructure and the schools and all the rest of it that comes with it. So one of the big issues on this is constitution, the idea that you can't, at a federal level, preference any state by a tax arrangement. My answer to that has been, well, don't preference any state. Allow any state to apply to be an economic zone. Another argument has been, well, this is just a way of weakening regulation. Well, it doesn't have to weaken it, it can improve it. And it doesn't have to be around just tax, it can be around a whole range of other incentives. And as an industry, we can work with governments to help them understand this. And most importantly, I think public policymakers are focusing on this because of the opportunities that Western Sydney is bringing forward, and Western Sydney Airport in particular is bringing forward. So my third point is then keep the infrastructure and city brief outcome focused. And I know many of us in the room play in the procurement space, and we know from long history, procurement agencies that love specifying things down to the last bolt, particularly in the construction space. That isn't the case now, and more you're seeing very innovative departments come up with keeping things outcome focused. So examples for this, Darling Harbour Live, the government procured that as a PPP with a project delivery agreement, and you got a very good world-class outcome in the convention and exhibition facility with a brand new residential district, brand new public realm all the way through that wouldn't have been achieved if we just asked for a convention centre. Similarly, for projects like West Metro that are coming up, yes, we want a train line, yes, it will be automated probably, but the land use around there is where the innovation can really come into play. And us as an industry have a responsibility to government to help them understand where those innovative opportunities are and where we can treat with them. I put this up because I wanted to take things away just from transport infrastructure. This is a building in New York called One Vanderbilt. It is a very, very impressive building. It's an A+ building, sadly not a Lendlease building. But the interesting thing about it is that it came from a government decision to increase capacity at Grand Central Station. So Grand Central Station is not just a transport asset, it's also a tourist hub. People go there to visit it. They were running out of capacity. There was nowhere for train passengers to go. And the City of New York put out a brief to the private sector saying, listen, we need to upgrade this station. We need more access to get people off rail lines into new passenger reception areas, and we need new retail and new pedestrian connectivity. Go. And they came up with this, which is the new connectivity from the rail line into One Vanderbilt, a brand new building that's being built right now. And most importantly, the building paid for the infrastructure. So the taxpayer managed to find a way for the private sector to build public infrastructure and public realm in a sensible way while also getting a return for itself and its own capital. And that is exactly where we want to be in the way we approach Western Sydney's infrastructure and the way we approach the public policy problems that we're seeing in Western Sydney. So my fourth point is partnership is key. And what's great about this room is there are so many different partners here where lots of people are working together. But by this, I mean more than simply a procurement, government procures and we respond type model. It's got to be about how do we together, private capital and government, solve problems together. And the two examples that really come to mind for me are, the government in New South Wales, the recent announcement around $4 billion or $4.2 billion for schools, which is an outstanding outcome given we have a growing population of kids that need to go to school. Mine are 4 and 2. They want to go to school right now. Who knows? But the question there is, how do we make that $8 billion? So the question is, how does the private sector involve itself in a way that allows schools to be delivered using the public capital that taxpayers made available to leverage into a bigger pie? And one of the ideas we've been playing around with is, if we do a new housing development, can we supply the school? If we get the right planning outcome, maybe we can pay for the school ourselves in a way that leaves the taxpayer only responsible for operations costs. Or is there an innovative way of packaging things into a public-private partnership where we are responsible for not just providing a school, but providing community outcomes, providing community facilities, providing childcare so we can avoid the, I think former Prime Minister Rudd called it the double drop-off, which, you know, is true. I do it now, right? This is the, I'm kidding, my wife does it, but no, I'm kidding on both counts. That is a sort of public policy problem, societal problem that in Western Sydney we will be experiencing more and more, because it is not the infrastructure of today are the first pieces of the puzzle in Western Sydney. We need to start then thinking about the second piece, which is how do we connect people in housing to jobs, from jobs to home, you know, and the various family issues that come around that. And that is about the social fabric that we're building in what Lucy describes as the Western Sydney, you know, the third city. We need to think about learning from all of the lessons we've learned in the eastern cities in order to get the Western City right. So my last point, before you hear the superstars who are going to tell you how to show us the money, is we've got to demand design excellence. And demanding design excellence creates opportunities. This is an important point, I think, because we demand design excellence everywhere else, and we're building something brand new in Western Sydney. So we've got to demand it there too, because, for two reasons. We are leaving a legacy for our children in Western Sydney. We want this place to be something we are all proud of. But beyond that, demanding design excellence actually attracts talent. And I think one of the previous speakers was talking about this. I know at our place, our young people at Western Sydney, at Lendlease, they want to work on the best projects that they can notch up and say, I did that, I worked on that. And if we don't offer those sorts of projects, which are not expensive to demand design excellence, it's not actually expensive to really force proponents to come up with good design outcomes, you won't attract the sort of talent that we need to build the economy of the future in Western Sydney and attract the private capital and the sort of corporate tenants that you're hoping for in Western Sydney. And I just wanted to put this picture up. So this is the Kengo Kuma building that is going to be built in Darling Harbour. This is a community building. It is a library. It was a requirement of our bid to put in a community building. And instead of putting in a community building, we put that in, which is a top-flight Japanese architect who's come in here. It's going to be a tourist attraction. It was part of the reason why we won at Darling Harbour. And that is the sort of thing that I'm hoping to see as we start to procure things like the airport in Western Sydney, that we start, you know, procuring things like West Metro. So in summary, these are the challenges that we have as a community, as a private sector, as the public sector, in terms of getting outcomes, the sort of outcomes we want in Western Sydney and the sort of economy that we want to see in the future in Western Sydney. And these are the sorts of challenges that I hope are useful to you in thinking about how to progress your own dreams. Yeah, thank you very much.